Elena Vasquez woke up at 4:30 in the morning, just like she did every single day. She did not need an alarm clock. Her body had learned long ago how to rise before the sun, trained by years of early mornings that had nothing to do with coffee pots and everything to do with survival. These days, the mornings were quieter. She would splash cold water on her face, pull her silver-streaked hair into a tight bun, and drive 15 minutes down an empty desert highway to a small diner called Marcy's. Marcy's sat on the edge of a town so small it did not appear on most maps. The sign outside had a burned-out letter, so it read Marks on most nights. The floors were old linoleum, the booths were patched with electrical tape, and the coffee was strong enough to wake a person twice. Elena had worked there for 11 years. She knew every crack in the counter, every squeak in the kitchen door, and exactly how many steps it took to get from the coffee station to table 7. She liked it that way. The regulars loved her. Old Pete, who came in every morning at 6 and ordered 2 eggs over easy with wheat toast, always said Elena made the best coffee in the state. She would smile and tell him it was the same coffee everyone else made. He would shake his head and say she was wrong. That small exchange happened almost every morning, and neither of them ever got tired of it. Elena did not talk about herself. If someone asked where she grew up, she would say Arizona and leave it at that. If someone asked why she moved to this little desert town, she would say she liked the quiet. People accepted those answers. She was kind, she was reliable, and she showed up every single day without fail. In a small town, that was enough. She had a small house a few miles from the diner. It had a porch where she liked to sit in the evenings, a garden where she grew tomatoes and peppers, and a closet in the back bedroom that she kept locked. She had not opened that closet in 3 years. On a Wednesday in late October, a silver truck pulled into the diner's gravel lot around noon. It was followed by 2 black SUVs, which was unusual. The town was the kind of place where a new face stood out, and 3 vehicles arriving together was the kind of thing people would talk about for weeks. Elena looked up from wiping the counter when she heard the gravel crunch. She watched through the glass as the doors opened. 3 men in dark jackets stepped out first. They moved in a way that most people would not notice, but Elena noticed immediately. They did not look around like tourists. They looked around like people checking a room before someone important walked into it. Then the back door of the silver truck opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of posture that came from decades of discipline. He wore simple civilian clothes, dark trousers, and a plain jacket, but there was nothing simple about the way he carried himself. His eyes were calm and sharp at the same time, like someone who had seen a great deal and made peace with most of it. He was Major General Raymond T. Cook. He was not there on official business. He was traveling privately, passing through the desert on a long drive he had been promising himself for years. He had heard of a good diner somewhere along this highway. He had decided to stop. When he walked through the door, the little bell above it rang the same way it did for everyone else. Elena was already at the counter, coffee pot in hand. She glanced up, registered the new group, and reached for clean mugs. And then she stopped. She did not drop anything. She did not make a sound. But something behind her eyes shifted, the way a still pond shifts when a stone breaks the surface. She knew that face. At the same time, the general stopped walking. He was 3 steps inside the diner, and he had gone perfectly still. His aide, a young man named Marcus who had worked with him for 4 years, almost walked into him from behind. Marcus looked up to see what had caused the general to stop. The general was looking at the woman behind the counter. She was in her mid-50s, with silver hair and quiet eyes, and an apron that said Marcy's on the front. She was holding a coffee pot. She looked, to anyone in that diner, like a woman who had worked there for a very long time. General Cook looked at her, the way someone looks at a person they thought they would never see again. Before any of this, another group had come in. They had arrived about 20 minutes earlier, a party of 4 men in expensive clothing who had pulled off the highway looking for a quick lunch. Their leader was a man named Garrett Hollis. He was in his late 40s, with the kind of confidence that came from having money and almost never being told no. He sold commercial real estate in the city and had made quite a lot of it. He was not a bad man, exactly. He was simply a man who had spent so long being important in his own world that he had forgotten other worlds existed. He had snapped his fingers at Elena when she came to take his order. When she brought the wrong dressing for his salad, which she had not actually done, he had sighed loudly and said to his companions, "You have to be patient with these people." When she quietly corrected him and showed him that the dressing was exactly what he had asked for, he waved his hand and moved on without an apology. At one point, when his colleague leaned over and asked who their server was, Garrett had glanced toward Elena and said, without lowering his voice, "Nobody. She's just a waitress." Elena had been standing close enough to hear it. She had said nothing. She had refilled his water glass and gone back to the kitchen. When General Cook began walking toward the counter, Garrett Hollis watched with mild curiosity. It was the kind of group that caught attention, the quiet coordination of the men in dark jackets, the deliberate way the older man moved through the space. Garrett assumed it was some kind of corporate executive. He turned back to his food. General Cook reached the counter. He set both hands on it and looked at Elena directly. When she met his eyes, he said one sentence, quiet and certain. "I never thought I'd find you here." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice that was perfectly steady, she said, "Would you like coffee, General?" He smiled. It was not a polished smile. It was the kind of smile that carried something heavy inside it. "Black," he said. "No sugar." He sat down at the counter. His aide Marcus was still standing near the door. He had been with the general for 4 years and had seen him meet senators, foreign dignitaries, and decorated officers. He had never seen him look at anyone the way he was looking at this woman. Marcus leaned toward one of the other aides, a man named Daniel, who had been with the general much longer. He whispered, "Who is she?" Daniel looked at the woman behind the counter for a moment. Then he said, low and even, 2 words. "Red Mesa." Marcus did not understand the words, but he watched what happened next, and he never forgot it. Every person in that diner who had served, and there were 3 of them, 2 former Marines who had stopped in for lunch, and one who was working in the kitchen, went still. One of them set his fork down very slowly. One of them straightened in his seat. The one in the kitchen stepped out into the doorway and stood there quietly, looking at Elena with an expression that was hard to describe. It was not quite awe, it was something older than that. Garrett Hollis noticed. He did not understand what he was seeing, but he noticed that something had changed in the room. He looked at the woman behind the counter again. She was pouring coffee. She looked exactly the same as she had 10 minutes ago. He turned to his colleague and frowned slightly. His colleague shrugged. General Cook drank his coffee slowly. For a while, he and Elena spoke in short, careful sentences, the way people do when they have not seen each other in a long time, and the space between them is full of things that are hard to say in a noisy room. He asked how long she had been here. She told him 11 years. He asked if she was all right. She said she was. He looked at her steadily, the way someone looks when they want to make sure the answer is true. Then he nodded. After some time, the general set his mug down and turned slightly on his stool. He looked at Garrett Hollis, who was finishing his lunch across the room. Then he looked back at Elena. "Does anyone here know?" he asked quietly. "No," she said, "and I would like to keep it that way." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That's not why I said it." She looked at him. Marcus needed to know who he was standing in the same room with. The general said, "That's all." Elena was quiet. She refilled his coffee, even though it was still mostly full. General Cook did not plan to explain anything, but Marcus, who was young and sincere and could not help himself, asked Daniel again, later, what Red Mesa meant. Daniel was a former Marine, retired, who had worked in military support roles for 20 years before joining the general's private staff. He had heard the name Red Mesa in a briefing once, years ago. He told Marcus what he knew, quietly, while they stood near the window. It had happened 13 years earlier, in a narrow mountain corridor in Afghanistan. A 4-person reconnaissance team had been moving through the pass when they were caught in a coordinated attack. The team was outgunned and pinned down almost immediately. 2 of the 4 members were badly wounded and could not move on their own. The 3rd team member was hit in the shoulder in the first minutes of the attack. She kept her position. For 41 minutes, while emergency air support was being scrambled, 1 Marine held that corridor alone. She managed the limited ammunition she had with extraordinary care. She kept the wounded team members protected. She communicated position and threat information clearly and without panic through the entire engagement. She was shot a second time during the 34th minute. She did not stop. When the air support finally arrived and the threat was neutralized, all 4 team members were alive. She was the one who had kept them that way. Her name was Sergeant Elena Vasquez. Her radio call sign, given to her by her unit, was Red Mesa. She was from the reservation near Red Mesa, Arizona, and she had enlisted in the Marine Corps at 19 years old. She served 3 combat tours. She was awarded the Navy Cross for her actions in that corridor, one of the highest military honors the United States gives, second only to the Medal of Honor. She was 39 years old at the time. She came home from that last tour, completed her service, and disappeared from the military world entirely. She had been pouring coffee in a small desert diner for 11 years. Marcus stood at the window and did not say anything for a while. Across the room, Garrett Hollis finished his meal and called for the check. Elena brought it. He glanced at it, pulled out his card without looking at her, and slid it across the counter. General Cook was still sitting at the counter. He watched this without expression. When Garrett's card was returned, and he was standing, gathering his things, the general spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried. It had the quality of a voice that was used to being heard. "That woman," he said, "carried 2 of my Marines out of a place none of them should have survived. She held a corridor alone for 41 minutes. Twice. Once for the first time, and once after she had already been shot." The diner went quiet. Garrett Hollis stopped moving. "I have shaken hands with a great number of people in my career," the general continued, calmly. "I have met very few who I would call genuinely exceptional. She is one of them." He did not say it with drama. He said it the way someone states a fact they have known for a long time and do not expect anyone to argue with. Elena did not turn around. She was writing something on the order pad near the register. Her pen did not stop moving. Garrett Hollis stood very still. He looked at the woman whose name he did not know, who he had dismissed as furniture, who he had described to his friends as nobody. He looked at the Marines in the room, who were all watching her with an expression he had never seen on anyone's face before and could not name. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. He picked up his jacket and walked out of the diner. His companions followed without a word. The general stayed for 2 hours. He and Elena talked about the desert, about how the light changed in the late afternoon, about a dog she had rescued 2 years ago that now slept at the foot of her bed. They talked about people they had both known, and they did not say much about most of them, because they both understood that some losses do not get easier with words. Before he stood to leave, he looked at her one more time and asked her the question she knew was coming. "Why here?" he said. "Why this?" Elena looked out through the diner window at the flat red land that stretched toward the horizon. The afternoon light was turning the desert gold. "They don't need to know who I was," she said. "They just need to know who I am." The general looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they understand something completely, even if they might have made a different choice themselves. He left a sum of money on the counter that covered every check in the diner that afternoon, with enough left over to make Marcy herself go quiet when she counted it later. On his way out, each of the men who had been in that room, the aides, the former Marines, Marcus, Daniel, paused near the counter for just a moment. None of them said anything. They each gave a small, simple nod. Elena nodded back. Then the bell above the door rang one last time, the gravel crunched, and the 3 vehicles pulled back onto the empty desert highway and disappeared into the wide, quiet afternoon. Elena picked up the coffee pot. Old Pete's mug was getting low. She went to fill it.